welcome to today's webinar on securing the vault. Today, we're going to talk about cloud security and how it relates to banking and how it plays a pivotal role in ensuring that banking services are delivered. But before we get into the subject at hand, let's talk a bit about who's here with you today. And I am accompanied by my great friend and expert in all things cloud, Anthony Sequeira.
Hey, thank you so much, Hernan. Dr. Hernan Murdoch with us, and it's so exciting to be finally teaching with you, Hernan. We've talked about wanting to do this for a long time, so it's great it's finally here. I just wanted to begin by telling you a bit about myself. As Hernan mentioned, boy, oh boy, it has been cloud, and more cloud in my career. I am a Cisco certified internet network expert of over 10 years. And when I used to teach networking, it used to be all about on-prem networking, of course. Back in the 90s, there wasn't much discussion of cloud back then, but since cloud has been really dominating discussions of networking and new technologies. So I've been doing a lot with cloud. I did achieve certifications in the big three. We'll be talking about that throughout this presentation: AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud Platform. And I've also authored many books on cloud now. My latest text is the AWS Cloud Practitioner Certification Guide. So thrilled to be here discussing cloud in conjunction with banking and security. Certainly a hot topic. Hernan, why don't you tell us more about yourself?
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Yes. So my background is mostly in internal audit, but before that, I was in banking operations, actually, and went through re-engineering. I was involved in the transition from an operational and from an IT perspective. And over the last few years, I've spent a lot of time really focusing on internal audit and how we can help support organizations when it comes to their compliance needs, their operational needs, their accounting and finance, all of these different things that auditors do. So I have over 25 years experience with that. I've also audited and consulted with companies around the world. I've written 6 books and numerous articles as well. And I've also taught at the university. So it is great to be an instructor at different capacity, corporate training versus teaching in academia. It's all the same, right? We're all just trying to share the knowledge and get people excited about what we do and what we know. So from that perspective, this is a great opportunity to be here and talk about something that people don't even think about, really. They just go about their business and things happen magically in the background.
Yeah.
We'll try to talk some more about that. So cloud is integral. But let's begin with one of those things that I believe drives a lot of our understanding of different dynamics in our world. And the first question is, well, why? Why the cloud?
Yeah. Such an amazing question with so many potential answers. But one of the things that we looked at was, okay, if we were to narrow this down to 3 main points, why is it that so many financial institutions, banks, are looking to cloud technology? What would those big 3 be? And one of them is, without a doubt, scalability. It really is remarkable when you talk about the big public cloud vendors and their ability to scale to basically a limitless capacity. We know in traditional on-prem environments, when our disk storage fills, it can be kind of crisis mode. But in the cloud, we have this limitless scalability capability. I'm thinking of one of the famous storage structures of AWS, an S3 bucket. Whenever I teach in our intro classes that bucket has no limit on what size it can become, students just are amazed to hear about a storage container, a logical storage container that can just grow and grow and grow. So scalability is a big thing here. Another thing that's super exciting for companies that are interested in staying current with technologies is the cloud's ability to make us more agile. A great example of this would be banks that have been really stuck with legacy type database technologies without a real clear-cut plan to enhance their operations with some of the new database technologies. The cloud may make things like this very simple for them. For example, if they want to spin up a new NoSQL database or a graph type database, something that's very cutting edge and new in the area of data storage, thanks to the cloud, they have the ability to go in and spin up and work with these experimental infrastructures. So agility is something that we really appreciate when it comes to a move to the cloud. And then we can't forget cost effectiveness. Something that we see with all of the major cloud vendors now is, we talked storage a moment ago and gave an example of scalability with storage. Well, another amazing thing is the tiering of storage that we can do. So for a large bank that might have to retain data for a certain period of time to meet with regulations, they have many tiers that are typically available to them where they can archive that data for a much lower cost. Now, Hernan, I always like to say, when it comes to saving money in the cloud, it's not like that's just immediate. Right. I mean, we don't just immediately start saving money. We need to really be educated on the cloud tech in order to save money.
Right. And there are a couple of other things that I want to also highlight. And you did a fantastic job in terms of looking at the positive side of things. And of course,
Sure.
there are many. These are just three of the key ones. But we also need to be mindful about the fact that there are certain things we need to keep in mind as we go through it. So when we're talking about, you can store as much data as you want. Now, here's the auditor in me now saying, however, you may want to be careful about what you're holding on, right? There are some cybersecurity concerns in terms of holding things, more things than you need, longer than you need. And then you finish by talking about cost effectiveness. Well, it's not free. So yes, it is cost effective. We want to make sure that we maximize that because profitability is at the end of the day very important, right? However, we want to make sure that we're not basically buying more than we need. And there are different ways that we can adjust as we go because you can manage your cost effectiveness and scalability simultaneously. So you don't have to have a lot of lag in terms of, oh, we ran out of disk space. What do we do for the next few hours until we call AWS and fix that, right? It doesn't work like that. But we want to make sure that we understand that there are certain things we need to keep in mind as we go through this process to leverage all the benefits that are there for us to take a hold of.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of security itself, which is our main topic, obviously, in this webinar.
Exactly.
Can we dramatically enhance our security posture with a cloud move? Well, of course we can. But is that automatic? Well, of course it isn't.
Okay, so then once again, what can go wrong here, right?
Exactly.
So let's talk about what can go wrong here. And we have a case study that will help us illustrate some of the things we need to be on the lookout for.
Yeah, what an amazing story this is. One of many that we could have chosen, but this is the Capital One breach that many of you are familiar with. What happened here is a very interesting case study, by the way, in security in the cloud. That's why we're bringing it up. It was a former employee of AWS that ended up successfully hacking Capital One data in AWS. So initially, when you look at this case study, you think, oh, well, this is a classic case of an insider being able to do this massive security breach. Only it's not that simple. You see, the exploit that was used in this case was a misconfiguration of an application firewall in Capital One that ultimately led to this breach. So notice the fact that it was a former AWS employee really wasn't all that relevant here because an application firewall was misconfigured. What was the end result of this breach? Well, as we've seen time and time again, unfortunately, in the cybersecurity landscape, it was sensitive PII of Capital One customers, 100 million accounts, and we're talking very sensitive PII here. We're talking credit card numbers, social security numbers, phone numbers, addresses, etc., leaked. And this leads us to one of the things that we'll mention, I'm sure, several times over the course of this webinar. This is a failure in the customer portion of the shared responsibility model. And notice 99% of the cloud security failures that we've recognized, at least 99%, tend to be this portion of that model. Now, for those of you that might not have heard of this model, what the shared responsibility model states, and we have to embrace this because this is how the cloud world works, is that we are no longer solely responsible for security. We are sharing that responsibility with the cloud provider. A great example of this is physical security. When we adopt technologies in the cloud, are no longer going to be responsible for securing the data center itself. That is the job of AWS or Google or Azure. So we get to offload that security responsibility, and we can just focus on things like encrypting the data with an appropriate data encryption algorithm. That would be our responsibility. So it's very important that we understand where our responsibilities stop and where the responsibilities of the cloud vendor kick in.
I want to add to what you just highlighted, because that's an important thing that sometimes people forget. And as auditors, we always highlight this fact that sometimes people think, well, I have a contract with this organization and I'm done. I just have to pay the invoice when it arrives. And it's not that simple. So a great illustration there. And also same thing happens with passwords, right? That you have the users who need to have some responsibility. That's why awareness is so important. We're going to go back to some helpful suggestions on how to do it. So let's move into that space in this conversation today. So we have put together 10 ways to fortify the cloud, different things that you can do to make sure that you're taking advantage of all of these opportunities, and that you're also going to help protect your organization and the data of your clients along the way. So let's begin with the first one.
Yeah, let's do it. The first one is to define a cloud strategy. And this goes back to what we have been alluding to a couple of times already in this presentation. We don't just dive into the cloud and go, great, we'll save money, we'll be more secure. This requires careful planning. And one of the first things that we need to do, if we have not done it already, is categorize sensitive data. Hernan alluded to moments ago about how, okay, store everything. Well, be careful now. We need to be storing certain pieces of data for certain periods of time, and we don't want to be storing other forms of data for X periods of time. So categorization of all this data is hugely important. You know, what's funny about this one, Hernan, is that a lot of tools in the cloud can help automate the categorization of data. So the great news is once you do this work on-prem, you are going to have tools to assist you that are in the cloud. But of course, we have a kind of chicken and the egg situation there that we have to be concerned with. Another one is a key consideration here in our cloud strategy should be to select a secure cloud provider. Now, we've mentioned several times already the big three, AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud Platform. They are armed and ready to talk to you with detailed documentation about how secure they are and what standards and regulations they meet. So this isn't going to be tough for you to find if you are dealing with the big three and researching their security.
So on that note, again, we're not going to go with Bob's cloud providing services exactly. Right out of a garage somewhere. Yeah. We're talking about banks in particular, but for everyone, really, we have to be very mindful of that. So we have to do our due diligence.
Yes.
Make sure that we understand who we're going to work with, what kind of security measures they have in place, how do they keep their staff trained and, yes. and up to the job, and so on. So very important that we, again, don't just think in terms of cost effectiveness, let's find the cheapest provider. We're looking for value, and value entails the full package in terms of what they're going to provide and all the security that goes with it. Because like we mentioned previously, and the Capital One example is a very good illustration, personal identifiable information, very critical, very costly if you have a problem. So we want to make sure that you select them carefully.
Yeah. Another huge issue that you really want to do your homework on up front is, where is your data? So we can't forget, even though we are storing our data in the cloud, as an audit professional, Hernan can confirm for us that, my goodness, organizations today need to know where their data is located. Is that data in North America? Is that data in Canada? Is that data in Singapore? This is a hugely important aspect.
Yes, for those of you who may not be familiar, GDPR becomes a big driver of a lot of this, and the United States has its own in many ways as well. And over time, we will see more of that. So yes, to your point in terms of where does my data live or reside, very important, and where your backups happen to be as well. So if you have multiple iterations, you also need to know that. So have a conversation with your provider.
Yes, absolutely. And great news on the big three: AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud Platform all make it very simple now within their user interfaces to specify and designate where that data is actually being stored. One thing you would want to research, and we can certainly help you with this in our training, is that many of them will automate the backup, the replication of data. So you'll want to scrutinize that as well. It's fine if your data is in North America like you expect. You just need to make sure that that backup that's automatically taken, that replication, is also in North America. Well, number two, Hernan, I know this one is certainly critical. It's ensuring encryption at all levels. And when we say encryption, we have to remember that the encryption technologies have evolved over the years. One of the kind of gold standards right now is the Advanced Encryption Standard, AES. And notice the number here of 256. This is referring to the strength of the encryption, the number of bits that are in the keying information if you wanted to get technical, but suffice it to say, the bigger the number with AES, the stronger the encryption. And encryption is going to be based on keying information. So passphrases, if you will, that make the encryption actually function. A huge burden for some large banks is rotating this information periodically, as they should. And this is another area where cloud can really help. An example I wanted to provide is the AWS Key Management Service. So here is a managed service that is designated to doing nothing but keeping those keys secure and even rotating those keys for us. KMS is an interesting example too, because it allows basically two modes of operation. We can have complete control over how keys are rotated and how the encryption is maintained, or we can allow AWS to completely do it. This is self-managed versus provider-managed keying. So banks can decide, okay, how much control over this do we want? How much control or how much automation do we want to just kick in thanks to the cloud provider? But there's one thing here in this discussion of encryption I really wanted to emphasize to everyone listening, and that is, remember, when we talk about integrating encryption into your cloud plan, we mean in all three phases of the data. Hernan and I were chatting before this presentation, and we both noted that everyone always tends to think of data at rest. Oh my gosh, all those financial records in the archive, we need to encrypt those. Yeah, but that's just part of what we encrypt. We can't forget that in addition to protecting data at rest, we need to protect data in transit and data in use. So always think of those three phases as we are integrating encryption into our strategy.
Exactly. So it's an element of the strength, like you indicated very clearly, but also in terms of the time and where it is at the moment and all the different players, because you may have third-party providers as well, in addition to your cloud provider, AWS and so on, but you may also have other parties as well. So making sure that in transit and in use are also part of the analysis that you're going to engage in.
Yeah, and it just dawned on me, my goodness, with the cloud, we are seeing in transit more and more because, Of course, we have to get the data into the cloud and we have to get the data out of the cloud.
Right.
Another thing that we need to think about, and the cloud can certainly help us with this, is to embrace strong identity and access management systems, particularly a centralized IAM. And this is an area where the cloud can really shine. Organizations today, big banks, might be struggling with, okay, we have our IAM system, but now we're partnering with other organizations and institutions. So now we need federation in the design, and they may struggle with federation and centralizing all of this. Where the cloud can really shine is providing centralized IAM mechanisms and giving us controls so that we can do something that is absolutely critical, and that is enforce least privilege access. And that's something that we want to do everywhere, by the way, not just in the cloud, but in our own on-prem networks. We want to make sure that users can perform just those privileges that they need and no other. Something else to consider here is tools like multi-factor authentication, which can now be easily rolled out thanks to cloud technologies. We can ensure that every single individual that is interacting with the data sets that are stored in the cloud must have passed multi-factor authentication. This used to be a trick that was reserved just for administrators. So admins had to do a multi-factor authentication process, but now with the cloud, we can make sure everyone does.
Exactly. And sometimes people will complain about it and they'll say, well, why do I need to do this now? And we need to make sure that we are educating people. And we'll talk some more about education and awareness raising later. But a big part of this is realizing that it doesn't really add that much more in terms of costs, and it increases significantly the amount of security that you have. Another thing to keep in mind is that as their bank or any institution, any financial institution, as it grows, whether it's just in terms of your assets, whether it's in terms of your customer base, your locations, and so on, that we need to make sure we go back to scalability. Make sure we are introducing the mechanism that will increase security as we grow, and that we bring our staff with us as well and all of our stakeholders. So very important that we enable all of these different features. What about number 4?
Yeah, number 4 is to make sure we secure our cloud workloads. Now, the great news here is, okay, we have to add security to the cloud workload. Oh my goodness, maybe we are engaging in the relational database service of Azure, for example. This is a new service to us. We're familiar with our on-prem relational databases, but this is the first time we might be running them in the cloud. So my goodness, what would we do? Well, the great news is all of your major public cloud providers now all give best practices for securing these managed services. And of course, they're focusing on your portion of the shared responsibility model. So they're doing their due diligence, but when you place your data sets and you place your workloads into the cloud, they're going to give you handy item by item checklist. They all do this to ensure that you are using the very best practices for securing those cloud workloads. Something else all the major cloud vendors are now finally doing is they're also giving us automated vulnerability scanning tools. So you can know if, oh my gosh, the Oracle software that we're using, or the Microsoft software that we're using, or the Splunk software that we're using, you name it, if that has issues with vulnerabilities, we can be alerted to that. And another thing that these public cloud vendors are doing more and more of is they're giving us workload protection programs. So they are basically building a fortress for us in the cloud, ready for our data, and they're giving us more of pre-built solutions so we have to do less. Now, of course, that gets back to that whole concept of control, right? We may want to be constructing the security for our workload step by step, as opposed to just trusting a pre-built solution.
Trust but verify.
Yeah, trust but verify. I love it.
Yes, and as we're talking about vulnerability scanning, we also need to make sure we're very clear between the difference of vulnerability scanning and penetration testing, right? And making sure that we are very clear on who's doing what and how that is going to be assessed.
Yes.
And along the way, we need to make sure that we're keeping track of things. So let's talk about number 5, because I think that's going to be very naturally flowing into that direction.
Yes, indeed. And as a former employee of Splunk, which is a large vendor when it comes to monitoring and tracking everything, I'm really passionate about this one. we need to be monitoring and logging everything. By everything, we mean from logins to data access to manipulation of permissions. We need to log everything, and the cloud can help dramatically here. Two big reasons come to mind right away. Number one, everything in the cloud is an API call these days. So these application programming interface calls that dictate everything that's being done, those are logged. So we have this immediate traceability just in how the cloud works. And then as far as storing this data, this logging data, we know we have a infrastructure that is scalable. So if we need more raw space for storing this information, thanks to the cloud, we have it.
So it helps us in many ways, but two that I'd like to highlight, one of them has to do with operational understanding of what's happening and who's doing what, when, where, and so on. You mentioned the scalability aspect of it. So that's very important so we can keep track of it and we can grow as needed. The other thing has to do with forensics. And if anything were to go wrong, you can always go back to those logs and see what happened, when, and who did it, hopefully.
Yes.
So we want to make sure we have a good understanding of what is being logged, how long it's being kept, and who is monitoring these things so that if anything were to happen, an anomaly, some kind of an outlier dynamic that presents itself, that we are able to quickly act on it. Very helpful, and our lawyers will be very appreciative too, and the regulators.
I love it.
Now, when it comes to monitoring, I don't want us to think that, someone has to sit there all day long just looking at screens as things kind of scroll by, because we have the benefit of artificial intelligence. So how can it help us?
Yeah, thank goodness. Here we are in a cloud world where everything's functioning via API calls. We can monitor all of that. We can log all of it. Now, as Hernan indicated, my gosh, we could be overwhelmed. What do we look at? Why are we looking at certain things? That's where our sixth recommendation comes in of 10, and that is to employ some type of security incident and event management software. And guess what? These are being integrated now into cloud. I mentioned I used to work directly for Splunk, and sure enough, in Microsoft's Azure, they created a product called Sentinel. What does Sentinel do? Exactly what Splunk would do. It is looking for security-related incidents and events and alerting them to us. And AI, as we alluded to, is an area that is being integrated so the system can just get smarter and smarter and smarter over time, alerting us to and correlating the events that are happening. So if you can imagine the system watching everything and going, oh, this happened, and then this happened, and this happened, this looks like a security breach, and alerting the correct personnel. Another thing that we do now, and we always didn't do this, is number 7, and that is we are now adopting more and more, and I love it, zero trust networking. You see, how we used to do it when it came to an overall security model was we would say, okay, this part of the network is trusted and these parts of the network are untrusted. And where did we push all of the security mechanisms to? The untrusted parts of the network. And we were just very comfortable with internal trusted domains. Now what we're seeing is a great push in, no, we're not trusting anything. So this is particularly important in the cloud. We don't want an environment where we go, all right, we're going to focus on our employees accessing the cloud, and then in the cloud, who knows what's going on? It's just a mystery. That's one of the issues with cloud security. No, we need to be intimately familiar with what is going on in that cloud, and monitoring and using a SIEM and all of that helps lead into that. But we trust no one in the cloud or outside of the cloud. So zero trust is a great one.
It's very important to remember that, because in some cases what happened, well, not some cases, but just about every case, when there's a problem, or if there's a problem, when it happens, people don't say, well, who's your cloud provider, right? They're going to go and scream at them. No, you are the organization that they're doing banking with.
That's right.
and you are the first line that they're going to go to. So from that perspective, then you need to be careful in terms of what happens. So zero trust. Person may be working there for a week, a year, 10 years, doesn't matter, right? We want to implement the same standards across the board, making sure that everyone who's doing something, we know what they are and if they're really entitled to do that, right?
Yeah.
Now, this also touches on the importance of awareness raising and training. And that is a very common control in just about every organization. Now, it's not just a matter of saying, okay, we're going to push this out once a year and done and check the box. We have to be very careful that we are very attuned to the substance of the training and the timing of the training. So tell us more.
Yeah. One of the things that we need to continuously be doing these days is phishing awareness training. Boy, oh boy, it is time after time, security breach after security breach. What was the initial vector to the problem? Phishing. Absolutely. Social engineering is still a huge problem. And as Hernan and I were discussing before this event, unfortunately, AI can help us here, but it can also harm us because the attackers are using AI to make phishing scams even more believable. So continuous training on phishing awareness, cybersecurity best practices, and also privacy regulations. Notice continuous training, not just, hey, checkbox, we did that this year and we won't have to worry about this again for X number of years. We need to be evolving this training just as the attackers evolve. And this leads to a culture of security that we should try and create. So we should have security awareness campaigns that we promote. We should reward secure behavior, and we should be holding regular security briefings. I know one of the things that we do internally here at ACI that is so neat is we will do mock phishing campaigns against our own employees. And of course, those that report the phishing attack get rewarded, and those that fall victim to the phishing attack get that additional training that they need so they can avoid those attacks in the future. We should all be doing this. And great news, the cloud makes campaigns like this very easy and effective to deliver. Well, boy, oh boy, we are at number 10, and this one is our final recommendation, and it is to partner with experts. This means taking advantage of security consultants, and all of the major public cloud vendors make this possible now. They all have programs where you can meet with paid or even just volunteer individuals that do have expertise in aspects of securing the cloud. Also, threat intelligence providers are typically made available now through cloud-based access. So you're getting this combined intelligence of many different vendors throughout the globe to assist you in the latest attacks, the latest best practices that you can use to secure your equipment. And very similar to the security consultant concept is the fact that there are cloud security specialists. And all of the major cloud providers now, they all offer varying degrees of support, so much so that you could have a security cloud specialist on the phone within minutes, as long as you have the appropriate tier of support.
Excellent. Yes. Great advice. And again, you're not alone. And that's a very important thing. From a technology perspective, you're not alone. You don't have to run your data center like you used to in the past. And from a knowledge perspective, you also have a lot of help, different price points. So no matter how big or small your bank happens to be, your financial institution, there's always someone out there who can help you and do it affordably. So very helpful. Thank you very much, Anthony, for walking us through these 10 great recommendations. And it's not just 10, because if you look closely, some of them had 3 and 4 ideas in there.
We snuck those in there.
But thank you very much. So we're going to move into the Q&A section in a moment. But before we do that, 2 things. One of them is please post your questions in the chat section so we can address it when we come back. But before that, we're also going to share with you a message.
Welcome to a new era for learning. My ACI is the ultimate e-learning experience built with the leader and the learner's success in mind. Our LMS platform integrates real-world labs, practice exams, and courseware materials in one place. A learner's dash is a high-level overview of their training journey, showing off their skills, credentials, and expertise. Leaders now have a cohesive view of their team's capabilities. My ACI was designed to be intuitive and personal. Learners can browse AI-tailored content, design their own paths, or be assigned programs to upskill. With over 80% completion rates, our industry-leading content can be discovered right alongside yours. We're making it fun with skill points, badges, and a gamified leaderboard driving performance. And our AI mentor is a 24/7 training tutor empowering the learner to level up. Track your investment with easily digestible graphs in our Leader Dash, viewing your team's training progress in real time. Now admins can create courses, assign programs, and manage an organization's content easily. Let's train smart. It's a new era for learning.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. So I hope that you're writing your questions in there in the chat section so we can answer it for you. Let's begin with the first question. So which of the big three public cloud vendors will be best for banking use?
Wow. So great question. Which of the big three is perfect for my large bank? I think they all have incredibly comparable feature sets now. I mean, that is something that we have seen with the big three, AWS, Azure, Google Cloud Platform. They have been consistently emulating each other now year after year after year. So if there's a new graph database service in one of these vendors, it's inevitable that we'll see that in the remaining big three. So one of the things I encourage everyone to think about is the expertise, the skill sets of their staff. To use myself as an example, while I achieved certifications in all three of the big three, what am I best versed in? What am I most comfortable with? What do I mentally design solutions with whenever I'm presented with a tech problem? It's AWS. AWS was the first cloud provider that I studied, the first cloud provider that I consulted solutions for, the one I use the most today. So notice, because that's where my expertise lies, that's where I would tend to go. So I think really looking at your staff and their skill sets would be very important here. And, Hernan, we have a question for the audience too. Did we want to do that now and then take more questions?
Sure, let's do it now.
All right. Yeah, we had a question for our audience.
Okay.
We'd love to help you and your team enhance your skills with our cybersecurity training. Are you interested in learning more? Let us know, please, in the chat. All right. Well, how about more questions from our audience, Hernan?
Absolutely. So one of the things that we talked a bit about was in terms of security training, right? Awareness raising and they're actually two different concepts. So maybe we can touch briefly on both. But this question is from Daniel, and he's asking, how often should we be conducting recurring security training?
Wow. Great question. So what is that frequency? I think a lot of organizations today, and Hernan, you would know much better than I, but I think they're annual, right? Would you say that a majority are doing their security training annually?
That's usually seen as the minimum. And it's important to highlight what the goal is of the objective, right? So from an audit perspective, let's call it the old school, the initial thought on that was, okay, do we do it or not do it, kind of binary? And it's like, yes, check the box. We do it in January, February, March, or something like it. But you have people who may be hired right after that. So what? They're going to wait another 9-10 months before they get training. So there are a couple of different things that are more qualitative that need to be looked at as well. So you may have one, let's call it the big training that happens for everybody. And then you probably want to work with your human resources or other groups in terms of identifying those people who are joining the organization later, that they get the training within, let's say, a week of hire after that, something to that effect. Now, another thing that's very helpful is to have different reminders throughout the year as well, so that you can have, you mentioned earlier in terms of sending out phishing emails and various things like those, we can have different activities throughout the year where we share information about attacks. We can talk about recurring schemes and scams that are going around. We can have the phishing exercise and the results of those things. So we can have a lot of different activities throughout the year, because the key takeaway here is keep it front of mind.
I
We
love
want to keep reminding people. So from the audit perspective, it'll go above and beyond the minimum requirements if you were to do those things. And always remember, what's the objective? Is to make sure everyone is working securely. So from that perspective, that'll definitely be above and beyond.
Yeah, it reminds me of our recommendation. We had the word continuous in that recommendation.
Exactly.
And, I just realized, wow, that means not recurring, that means constant.
Right.
So I love that. I also love the reminder on onboarding. So in that phase of onboarding those new employees, as Hernan indicated, we are making sure that these new employees begin that continuous training cycle right as they're brought on board.
Right. Exactly. Don't want to leave anyone behind.
Nope.
All right. So let's look at another question, because we have several. Yes. So we have Sarah asking a very important question here as well, and it has to do with AI. Very current topic, of course. How is AI able to help with security in the cloud?
Boy, oh boy, we are seeing this more and more across the cloud vendors and across the services that they offer. It is helping in just about every way. So one of the things that we alluded to at the beginning of this presentation in one of our very first recommendations, it had to do with classifying your assets. Well, sure enough, there are AI mechanisms now and machine learning mechanisms now that will automate this for you in the cloud. So what we're seeing is not just AI in one instance of cloud security, but in basically all aspects of it. So when it comes to classifying your data, AI is helping. What threats or vulnerabilities might exist, AI is helping. What best practices should you use for your particular resources, AI is helping. So we are seeing AI in just about all aspects of cloud security now, and this is a compelling reason to move to the cloud for many of these organizations like big banks that might not be able to focus on those new and emerging technologies.
An important takeaway there as well has to do with search for outliers and looking at patterns. And we definitely need all the tools that can help us in that regard. Now, building on that, we have another question related to AI, and this is from Harvey. And the question is, are there any fad security providers or AI tools that we should steer clear of?
Boy, that is an interesting one. So all of the major cloud vendors do another thing that I really appreciate, and they do clearly let us know. I mean, they make it quite clear on their services and technologies now that are experimental. So that's kind of a new trend. When these major cloud providers were just starting out, they didn't make this distinguishing characteristic. In fact, what they were doing, quite frankly, was they were racing against each other to show that they had the widest variety of tech services available. Now, what they're much better at doing, again, we're talking about the big three here, what they're much better about doing now is saying, okay, we have a new service, it does XYZ, but this service is still in its experimental phases. You see this with Google, with Azure, and with AWS. So I would be cognizant of that, right? We want to recognize that and realize that, wow, there could be flaws in this service that have never been discovered because this service is so brand new and cutting edge. Another thought on this is something that Hernan mentioned in this presentation today, and that is Bob's Discount Cloud Barn, right? We're not saying don't look at smaller cloud providers, but what we are saying is ask them for security documentation on how are they adhering to their portion of the cloud security model. We will want to intensely study smaller cloud providers before we leap to them.
Excellent. Very good advice. We have a question from Ashwin, and it has to get into the financial side of things a bit. So Ashwin's question is, what might be the average ROI, return on investment, time for a medium-sized organization that plans to begin the cloud journey?
Yeah. Again, we've seen tremendous work from the big three in this area. So they now all have dedicated sites, okay, dedicated documentation portals, for lack of a better word, that walk you through a cloud migration process. And in fact, they even provide tools now where you will input how you plan to migrate to the cloud, and they will provide feedback based on your plan. So this is something that we no longer have to conduct in a vacuum. All right, we're moving to the cloud. Let's do this as best we know how. Those days are over. The major cloud providers are going to be able to walk you through the proper cloud migration. And this is something that does take some time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we are not going to complete a cloud migration in 1 week. No, that would only be the case if we were very, very small. So I'm hesitant to give an exact time frame, but the great news is these cloud providers have tools for the migration to work with you on, and they can tell you very accurately what you are looking at from a time perspective in your migration.
Right. And one of the things I want to remind everyone as well, we touched on this when we're talking about those 10 items. One of them had to do with your data, and in terms of cataloging what you have and how long you need to keep it, right? Your document retention period and your document destruction window and so on. So we have all of those things that you need to do as well. And this also brings us to the last question that we have time for. And this is from Kent. The question is, if we are not currently using a cloud infrastructure, would you recommend transitioning fully to the cloud immediately or adopting a hybrid approach and gradually moving there?
Yeah, I absolutely love the hybrid concept. And this is what we see time and time again. As a massive learning provider here at ACI, we are hybrid. We did not migrate all of our IT infrastructure to the cloud. No, what we did, what many banks will do, is we examined what areas of our technology could the cloud most benefit? Where can we get the biggest bang for our buck, if you will, when it comes to a partial migration to the cloud? And that's what we did. So even the major cloud providers will tell you, okay, let's migrate this this data set or this function. They will help you with this hybrid approach, believe it or not, right? You might think, well, they're interested in making money, so they're going to want us all in the cloud as quickly as possible. No, I love a gradual service by service type migration for sure.
Excellent. Great advice, great suggestions all around. Anthony, thank you so much for helping us better understand. Any last thoughts that you want to share with our audience before we finish?
Yeah, just wanted to thank everyone for joining us. You know, it is through events like this that we can become very well versed in things like security and the cloud, and we can avoid being the next major headline that is bad news when it comes to a cybersecurity breach.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Anthony. And thanks to our viewers for joining us today. Hope you'll join us for another event in the future. Thank you so much.